Welcome to the State of the Union from Brussels. The costs of war, a war economy, the economic impact of war. In addition to the impact of human suffering, which can never be counted, war is in fact also a question of financial capacity. Since the Russian invasion 2 years ago, the EU and its member states have supported Ukraine with almost 88 billion euros, according to figures from last January. But the European Union has also decided to invest more in its own defense capacity. Some propose issuing common debt, others advocate using windfall profits from immobilized Russian assets. The Leaders' Summit in Brussels this week revolved a lot about how to get the necessary resources.
There's a strong support to use, at the moment, being the windfall profits or proceeds of the immobilized assets for military purposes for Ukraine. And I told the leaders that if we are swift now in concluding the proposal, we could disburse the first billion on the 1st of July already.
Support for the far right is likely to rise in the next European Parliament, but pro-European parties will still hold 63% of the seats, according to a poll carried out by Ipsos for Euronews. The exclusive survey was revealed this week during Euronews on-air special live event that launched the channel's in-depth coverage of the campaign for the European elections. Nearly 26,000 people in countries representing 96% of the EU population shared their intentions for the vote that will elect 720 representatives for the European Parliament in June. The ability to form coalitions to pass more controversial legislation could be the biggest test for the centre's traditional forces.
We tried to see what would happen if the EPP, the Renew Group, and the ECR Group tried to form a coalition, and actually they don't have a coalition. It only makes for 46% of the MEPs, so it would be not enough to have a strong and stable coalition, and it's exactly the same if we try to have a right-wing coalition formed by the EPP, the ECR, and the ID group. They would have just 45% of the MEPs.
For the third year, the European Humanitarian Forum took place in Brussels with the goal of getting more funding for global needs that reached unprecedented levels. The European Union member states, together with the European Commission, announced pledges over 7 billion euros. Projections indicate that nearly 300 million people around the world need humanitarian assistance. Several United Nations agencies sent their representatives, and I spoke with Natalia Kanem, Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund. Dr. Natalia Kanem, thank you very much for your presence in our program. One of the themes of the European Humanitarian Forum is funding gap and prioritization. Which areas this gap is widening, and what can be done in order to have more resources?
The issue is women and children are always the ones who bear the worst of any crisis, humanitarian conflict and climate disaster being the most common reasons. When you're looking for the $46 billion just in this 1 year that's needed, we see that typically humanitarian appeals go underfunded, and the private sector very often can contribute medicines. They can contribute materials.
There is a general consensus that women and children are particularly vulnerable in humanitarian crisis. We are seeing that very clearly in the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip. What could be done to protect them?
You can imagine having delivered under the stress of the circumstances of a woman who is in that part of Gaza right now. How are you going to breastfeed if you don't have the adequate supplies to be able to feed yourself and the water and everything else that it takes to make the newborn survival from breast milk possible? So UNFPA and the entire UN system has joined in the call for a humanitarian ceasefire so that we can attend to people who are at their last stretch.
Using sexual violence as a war weapon is unfortunately still very common, but also maybe sometimes undervalued. So what does the agency do in that term?
Crimes against someone's body are some of the worst things that can happen to a woman or a girl. This is going to haunt them for the rest of their lives. So UNFPA is on the scene with the responsibility, first and foremost, to prevent, to help women, for example, with lighting, if they have to go to the latrine at night in a camp, for example. Sadly, unfortunately, we're seeing increasing incidents and more viciousness of these types of sexual assaults during conflict. And in that instance, UNFPA is there to provide the counseling, to provide the medical care that may be required.
Dr. Natalia Kanem, thank you very much for your contribution to the program.
Thank you very much.
War, humanitarian crisis, divisive politics. For many in Europe and around the world, the present day and prospects for the future are bleak, if not dark. But it is necessary to cultivate the light of hope and appreciate, whenever possible, the beauty of colors. It is the case in Zagreb, capital of Croatia, that displays its most visually striking festival of the year until Sunday. With 29 installations and projections throughout the city, it might be daunting to try and find the time to catch them all. And beware that they will be shut off for 15 minutes at 8:30 p.m. on March 23 to mark Earth Hour. With this, we close our edition. Thank you for watching.